Welcome you two, and welcome back to our last day of Matilda. Today we've got 2 chapters to read and they are quite long, so we're going to get started. So here's our contents page and we're reading the last 2, which is called The Third Miracle. So remember, we've had already the first miracle, which is when she tipped the glass over, and the second miracle, and now we're on the third miracle. And then the last one, which is called A New Home, which sounds very exciting. So these 2 chapters sound really exciting, and then we'll have an end to our story. So let's get started. The third miracle. The next day was Thursday, and that, as the whole of Miss Honey's class knew, was the day that the headmistress would take charge of the first lesson after lunch. In the morning, Miss Honey said to them, "One or two of you did not particularly enjoy the last occasion when the headmistress took the class, so let us try and be especially careful and clever today. How are your ears, Eric, after the last encounter with Miss Trunchbull?" "She stretched them," Eric said. "My mother said she's positive they are bigger than they were." "And Rupert," Miss Honey said, "I am glad to see you did not lose any of your hair after last Thursday." "My head was so jolly sore afterwards," Rupert said. "And you, Nigel," Miss Honey said, "please do not try and be a smart aleck with the headmistress today. You are really quite cheeky to her last week." So what Miss Honey is saying is she's trying to warn the class that the headmistress is coming in, so you need to be on your best behaviour. "I hate her," Nigel said. "Try not to make it so obvious," Miss Honey said. "It doesn't pay. She's a very strong woman, and she has muscles like steel ropes." "I wish I was a grown-up," Nigel said. "I'd knock her flat." "I doubt you would," Miss Honey said. "No one has ever got the better of her yet." "What will she be testing us this afternoon?" the small girl asked. "Almost certainly the 3 times table," Miss Honey said. "That's what you have meant to learn this past week, so make sure you know it." Lunch came and went. After lunch the class reassembled. Miss Honey stood at one side of the room. They all sat silent, apprehensive, waiting. And then, just like some giant of doom, the enormous Trunchbull strode into the room in her green breeches and cotton smock. She went straight to the jug of water, lifted it up by the handle, and peered inside. "I'm glad to see," she said, "that there's no slimy creatures in my drinking water this time. If there had been then something exceptionally unpleasant, it would have happened to every single member of the class. That includes you, Miss Honey." The class remained silent and very tensed. They had learnt a bit about the tigress by now, and no one was about to take any chances. "Very well," boomed the Trunchbull. "Let us see how you know your 3 times table. Or, to put it another way, let's see how badly Miss Honey has taught you the 3 times table." The Trunchbull was standing in front of the class, legs apart, hands on her hips, scowling at Miss Honey, who was stood silent to one side. Matilda was sitting motionless at her desk in the second row, watching things very carefully. "You!" the Trunchbull shouted, pointing her finger as the size of a rolling pin at a boy called Wilfred. Wilfred was on the extreme right of the front row. "Stand up, you!" she shouted at him. Wilfred stood up. "Recite the 3 times table backwards," the Trunchbull barked. "Backwards?" stammered Wilfred. "But I haven't learnt it backwards." "There you are!" cried the Trunchbull triumphantly. "She's taught you nothing, Miss Honey. Why have you taught them absolutely nothing in the last week?" "That's not true, headmistress," Miss Honey said. "They've all learnt their 3 times table, but I see no point in teaching them backwards. There's little point in teaching them anything backwards. The whole object of life, headmistress, is, for example, is to go forwards. I venture to ask you, even when, for example, you're spelling a single word like wrong backwards straight away, I very much doubt it." "Don't get impertinent with me, Miss Honey," the Trunchbull snapped, and then she turned back to unfortunate Wilfred. "Very well, boy," she said, "answer me this. I have 7 apples and 7 oranges and 7 bananas. How many pieces of fruit do I have altogether? Hurry up, get on with it, give me the answer." That's adding, Wilfred cried. That isn't the 3 times table. You blithering idiot, shouted the Trunchbull. You festering gunboil, you flea-bitten fungus, that is the 3 times table. You had 3 separate lots of fruit, each of them has 7 pieces. 3 sevens are 21. Can't you see that, you stagnant cesspool? I'll give you one more chance. I have 8 coconuts, 8 monkey nuts, and 8 nutties, little idiots like you. How many nuts do I have altogether? Answer me quickly. Poor Wilfred was properly flustered. Wait, he said, please wait. I've got to add up 8 coconuts and 8 monkey nuts, and he started counting on his fingers. You bursting blister, yelled the Trunchbull. You moth-eaten maggot. This is not adding up, it's multiplication. The answer is 3 8s or 8 3s. What's the difference between 3 8s and 8 3s? Tell me, you little mangled little wurzel, and look sharp about it. Now Wilfred was far too frightened and bewildered to even speak. In 2 strides the Trunchbull was beside him, and by some amazing gymnastic trick, it may have been judo or karate, she flipped up the back of Wilfred's legs on one of her feet, so that the boy shot up off the ground and turned as the somersault, and she had caught him by the ankle and held him dangling upside down like a plucked chicken in the shop window. 3 8s, the Trunchbull shouted, swinging Wilfred from side to side by his ankle. 8 3s is the same as 3 8s, and 3 8s are 24. Repeat that. At that exact moment, Nigel at the other end of the room jumped to his feet and started pointing excitedly at the blackboard and screaming, The chalk! The chalk! Look at the chalk! It's moving all on its own. Ooh, so now this last bit is interesting. Someone's saying the chalk is moving all on its own. Now, we know that obviously wouldn't happen, so who do you think is moving the chalk? Oh, let's have a look and see. So hysterical and shrill was Nigel's scream that everyone in the place, including the Trunchbull, looked at the blackboard, and there, sure enough, was a brand new piece of chalk was hovering near over the grey-black writing surface of the blackboard. It was writing something. It's writing something, Nigel screamed. The chalk is writing something. And indeed it was. What the blazes is this? Yelled the Trunchbull. It had shaken her so much to see her own name being written like by an invisible hand. She dropped Wilfred to the floor and she yelled at nobody in particular. Who's doing this? Who's writing it? So it says here, Agatha. So remember, Matilda asked Miss Honey, what did Miss Honey's father call Miss Trunchbull? So she's writing her name, Agatha. The chalk continued to write, Agatha, this is Magnus. Now remember, Magnus was Miss Honey's father. This is Magnus. Everyone in the place heard the gasp at the same time from the Trunchbull's throat. No, she cried. It can't be Magnus. It is Magnus, and you better believe it. Miss Honey at the side of the room glanced swiftly at Matilda. The child was sitting very straight at her desk, her head held high and her mouth compressed and her eyes glittering like 2 stars. She's obviously very focused. For some reason, everyone now looked at the Trunchbull, and the woman's face had turned white and as snow, and her mouth was opened and shutting like a halibut, so it's like a fish, out of water, giving out a series of strangled gasped. So now it says, Agatha, give my Jenny back her house. So remember, it's supposed to be Magnus. So he's saying, give my Jenny, so give my daughter back her house. Give my Jenny her wages, the money she earns from school. Give my Jenny the house, then get out of here. If you don't, I will come and get you. I will come and get you like you got me. So Matilda's obviously assuming that Miss Trunchbull did have something to do with Magnus's death. I am watching you, Agatha. So if you look at the Trunchbull's face, it does say here, she was gasping, strangled gasps. So she's probably really shocked that not only is the chalk writing, but it's saying stuff about her, and it knows what's happening. The person obviously who's writing knows what's happening. The chalk stopped writing. It hovered for a few moments, and then it suddenly dropped on the floor with a tinkle, and it broke into two. Wilfred, who managed to resume his seat in the front row, screamed, "Miss Trunchbull has fallen down! Miss Trunchbull is on the floor!" This was the most sensational bit of news the entire class had, and they jumped out of their seats to have a really good look. And there she was, the huge figure of the headmistress, stretched full length on her back across the floor, out for the count. So sometimes when things happen, some people can faint, so they basically fall to the floor, and it's a bit like they're asleep. So Miss Trunchbull is now out for the count, which means she's basically she's fainted and she's unconscious. Miss Honey ran forward and knelt beside the prostrate giant. "She fainted," she cried. "She's out cold. Someone go and fetch the matron at once," which is like the nurse. 3 children ran out of the room. Nigel always was ready for action, leapt up and seized a big jug of water. "My father says cold water is the best way to wake someone up who's fainted," he said, and with that he tipped the entire contents of the jug over Miss Trunchbull's head. No one, not even Miss Honey, protested. So basically, no one really stopped. So look, there she is. She's all wet, and normally water does bring people round. So let's see if she comes round. As for Matilda, she continued to sit motionless at her desk. She was feeling curiously elevated. She felt as though she had touched something that was not quite of this world, the highest point of the heavens, the farthest point in the stars. She had felt the most wonderfully the power surging up behind her eyes, gushing like a warm fluid inside her skull. Her eyes had become scorching hot, hotter than ever before, and things had come bursting out of her eye sockets. And then a piece of chalk had lifted itself up and began to write. It had seemed as though she had hardly done anything at all. It had been so simple. The school matron, followed by 5 teachers, 3 women, 2 men, came rushing into the room. "By golly, someone's floored her at last," cried one of the men, grinning. "Congratulations, Miss Honey." "Who threw all the water over her?" asked the matron. "I did," Nigel said proudly. "Good for you," another teacher said. "Shall we get some more?" "Stop that," the matron said. "We must carry her up to the sick room." It took all 5 teachers and the matron to lift the enormous woman and stagger her out of the room. Miss Honey said to the class, "I think you all better go out to the playground and amuse yourselves until the next lesson." Then she turned and walked over to the blackboard and carefully wiped out the chalk writing. The children had begun filing out of the classroom. Matilda started to go with them, but as she passed, Miss Honey paused, and her twinkling eyes met the teacher's eyes. And Miss Honey ran forward and gave the tiny child a great big hug and kiss. So you can see that at the end, Miss Honey gives Matilda a hug and kiss. So their relationship's becoming really close. It's actually made them bond really close. And it's really, Miss Honey's very grateful and thankful for what Matilda's done, because Matilda's tried to get Miss Honey's house back. So the last chapter here is called A New Home. And this is our last chapter, and let's see what happens in this chapter. Let's see if it's a good end to the story. Later that day, the news had begun to spread that the headmistress had recovered from her fainting fit, and then she had marched out of the school building, tight-lipped and white in the face. So look, she's marched out, so she's not in the school anymore. The next morning, she didn't even turn up at school. At lunchtime, Mr. Trilby, the deputy head, telephoned her house to inquire if she was feeling unwell. There was no answer to the phone. When school was over, Mr. Trilby decided to investigate further, so he walked to the house where Miss Trunchbull lived on the edge of the village. A lovely small red brick Georgian building, known as the Red House, tucked away in the woods behind the hills. He rang the bell, no answer. He knocked loudly, no answer. He called out, "Is anyone home?" No answer. He tried the door. To his surprise, he found it unlocked, and he went in. The house was silent, and there was no one in it, and yet all the furniture was still in its place. Mr. Trilby went upstairs to the main bedroom. Here there was also everything to be normal until he started opening the drawers and looking into the cupboards. There were no clothes or underclothes or shoes anywhere. They had all gone. So the house is still there, all the furniture, everything's there, but all Miss Trunchable's clothes are gone, and she seems to be gone. So I think that she has left, just like the note asked her to do. What do you think? She's done a bunk, Miss Strawberry said to herself, and he went to inform the school governess that our headmistress apparently had vanished. On the second morning, Miss Honey received a registered letter from the firm of the local solicitors, informing her that the last will and testament of her late father, Dr. Honey, had suddenly and mysteriously turned up. This document revealed that ever since her father's death, Miss Honey had been the rightful owner of the property on the edge of the village known as the Red House, which had recently been occupied by Miss Agatha Trunchbull. So the letter says that she is the owner. It says she's the rightful owner, so it means that she actually owns the property, not Miss Trunchbull. The will also showed that her father's lifetime savings, which fortunately were still safely in the bank, had also been left to her. The solicitor's letter added that if Miss Honey would kindly call into the office as soon as possible, then the property and the money would be transferred into her name very rapidly. Miss Honey did just that. Within a couple of weeks she had moved into the Red House, the very place she had been brought up in, and where, luckily, all the family furniture and pictures were still around. From then on, Matilda was a welcome visitor to the Red House every single evening after school, and a very close friendship began to develop between the teacher and the small child. So Matilda goes there every single day after school, and it says that a very close relationship began to develop. So they're getting closer and closer. And I think that's because Miss Honey is obviously very grateful, Matilda said. Miss Honey likes Matilda because she's a really good girl, and she's obviously got this power which fascinates Miss Honey. But Matilda likes Miss Honey because she's nice to her and she's kind, but she unfortunately doesn't have that. Back at school, great changes were also taking place. As soon as it became clear that the Trunchbull had completely disappeared from the scene, that the excellent Mr. Trilby was appointed the head teacher in her place. And very soon after that, Matilda was moved up to the top form, where Mrs. Plimsoll quickly discovered that this amazing child was every bit as bright as Miss Honey had said. One evening a few weeks later, Matilda was having tea with Miss Honey in the kitchen at the Red House, and after school, as they always did, when Matilda said suddenly, "Something strange has happened to me, Miss Honey." "Tell me about it," Miss Honey said. "This morning," Matilda said, "just for fun, I tried to push something over with my eyes, and I couldn't do it." Nothing moved. I didn't even feel the hotness building up in my eyeballs. The power had gone. I think I've lost it completely. Miss Honey carefully buttered a slice of brown bread and put a little strawberry jam on it. "I've been expecting something like that to happen," she said. "Have you? Why?" Matilda asked. "Well," Miss Honey said, "it's only a guess, but here's what I think. While you were in my class, you had nothing to make you struggle. Your fairly enormous brain was going crazy with frustration. It was bubbling and boiling away like mad inside your head. There was a tremendous energy bottled up in there with nowhere to go, and somehow or other you were able to shoot out and on the go." Oh, where was I? Frustration inside your head. There was a tremendous energy bottled up in there with nowhere to go, and somehow or another you were able to shoot that energy out through your eyes and make objects move. But now things are different. You are in the top form, competing against children more than twice your mental age. And your mental capacity is being used up in the class. Your brain, for the first time, is having to struggle to strive and keep really, really busy, which is great. That's only a theory, mind you, and it may be a silly one, but I don't think it's far off the mark. "I'm glad it's happened," Matilda said. "I wouldn't want to go through life as a miracle worker." "You've done enough," Miss Honey said. "I can still hardly believe you made this all happen for me." So it shows again here that Miss Honey is very grateful. She can't believe that you've made this happen for me. Matilda, who was perched on a tall stool at the kitchen table, ate her bread and jam slowly. She did so love these afternoons with Miss Honey. She felt completely comfortable in her presence, and the two of them talked to each other more or less as equals. So in her house, the Mr. and Mrs. Wormwood would talk to Matilda like she's a really small child. So they're here and they would talk down to her all the time. But when Miss Honey and Matilda talk, they're equal, so they're same level. They talk to each other nicely and they understand and they talk to each other, and it's much nicer for Matilda. Did you know, Matilda said suddenly, that the heart of a mouse beats at the rate of 650 times a minute? I did not, Miss Honey said, smiling. How absolutely fascinating. Where did you read that? In a book from the library, Matilda said, and that means it goes as fast that you can't even hear the separate beats. It must just sound like a buzz. It must, Miss Honey said. And how fast do you think a hedgehog heart beats? Matilda asked. Tell me, Miss Honey said, smiling again. It's not as fast as a mouse, Matilda said. It's 300 times per minute. But even so, you wouldn't have thought it went as fast as a creature that moves so slowly, would you, Miss Honey? I certainly wouldn't, Miss Honey. Tell me one more. A horse, Matilda said. That's really slow, only 40 times per minute. This child, Miss Honey told herself, seems to be interested in everything. When one is with her, it's impossible to be bored. I love it. The two of them stayed sitting and talking in the kitchen for about an hour or so longer, and then at about 6 o'clock Matilda said good night and set off to walk home to her parents' house, which was about an 8-minute journey away. There, when she arrived back at her own gate, she saw a large black Mercedes motor parked outside. She didn't take too much notice of that. There were often strange cars parked outside her father's place. But when she entered the house, she was confronted by a scene of utter chaos. Her mother and father were both in the hall, frantically stuffing clothes and various objects into suitcases. What's on earth going on? She cried. What's happening, Daddy? We're off, Mr. Wormwood said. We're not looking up. We're leaving for the airport in half an hour, so you better get packed. Your brother's upstairs getting ready to go. Get a move on, girl. Get going. Off? Matilda cried. Where to? Spain, the father said. It's much better climate than lousy country. Spain? Matilda cried. I don't want to go to Spain. I love it here, and I love my school. Just do as what you're told and stop arguing, the father snapped. I've got enough troubles without you messing around. But Daddy, Matilda said. Shut up, the father shouted. We're leaving in 30 minutes and I'm not missing that plane. But for how long, Daddy? Matilda cried. When are we coming back? We aren't, the father said. Now beat it, I'm busy. Matilda turned away from him and walked out through the open door. As soon as she was on the road, she began to run. She headed straight back towards Miss Honey's house, and she reached it in less than 4 minutes. She flew up the drive, and suddenly she saw Miss Honey in the front garden, standing in the middle of a bed of roses, doing something with a pair of clippers. Miss Honey had heard the sound of Matilda's feet racing over the gravel, and now she straightened up and turned and stepped out of the rose bed as the child came running up. My, she said, what on the world is the matter? Matilda stood there before her, panting, out of breath, her small face flushed crimson all over. We're leaving, she cried. They've all gone mad, and they're filling their suitcases, and they're leaving for Spain in about 30 minutes. Who is? Miss Honey said quietly. Mummy and Daddy and my brother, Mike, and they said that I've got to go with them. You mean for a holiday? Miss Honey asked. Forever, Matilda cried. Daddy said we're never coming back. There was a brief silence, and then Miss Honey said, Actually, I'm not very surprised. You mean you knew we were going? Matilda said. Why didn't you tell me? No, darling, Miss Honey said. I didn't know you were going, but the news doesn't surprise me. Why, Matilda said. Please tell me why. She was still out of breath from running from the shock of it all. Because your father, Miss Honey said, is with a bunch of crooks. Everyone in the village knows that. My guess is that he's on the receiving end of the stolen cars from all over the country, and he's in very deep. Matilda stared with open-mouthed. Miss Honey went on, people bought stolen cars from your father's workshop where he changed the number plates and resprayed the bodies after a different colour and all the rest. And now somebody's probably tipped him off to the police that they are after him, and he's doing what he can, running off to Spain when they can't get him. He'll have been spending his money out there for years, already waiting for him to arrive. There they were then standing on the lawn in the front of the lovely red brick house with its weathered old red tiles and tall chimneys, and Miss Honey still had the pair of garden clippers in one hand. It was a warm golden evening, and a blackbird was singing somewhere nearby. "I don't want to go with them," Matilda shouted suddenly. "I don't want to go with them." "I'm afraid you must," Miss Honey said. "I want to live here with you," Matilda cried out. "Please let me live here with you." "I only wish you could," Miss Honey said, "but I'm afraid it's not possible. You cannot leave your parents just because you want to. They have a right to take them with you." "But what if you agreed?" Matilda cried eagerly. "Why, if they said yes and I can stay with you, would you let me stay with you then?" Miss Honey said softly, "Yes, that would be heaven." "Well, I think they might," Matilda cried. "Honestly, I think they might. They don't actually care a tuppence about me," which means they don't care like any amount of money, not even a penny. "Not so fast," Miss Honey said. "We've got to be fast," Matilda said. "They said they're leaving any moment. Come on," she shouted, grasping Miss Honey's hand. "Please come with me and ask them. But we'll have to hurry. We have to run." The next moment the two of them were running down the drive together, and then out of the road. Matilda was ahead, pulling Miss Honey with her after her by the wrist, and was wild and wonderful dash made them along the country lane and through the village to the house where Matilda's parents lived. The big black Mercedes was still outside now, and its boot and its doors were open, and Mr. and Mrs. Wormwood and their brother were scurrying around like ants, piling in the suitcases as Matilda and Miss Honey came dashing up. "Daddy, Mummy," Matilda burst up, gasping for breath. "I don't want to go with you. I want to stay here and live with Miss Honey. She says I can, but you have to give me permission." "Please say yes. Go on, Daddy. Say yes, say yes, say yes, Mummy." The father turned up and looked at Miss Honey. "You're that teacher woman who came here once to see me, aren't you?" he said, and then he went back to stowing his suitcases in the car. The wife said to him, "This one will have to go on the back seat. There's more room for it in the boot." "I would love to have Matilda," Miss Honey said. "I would look after her with love and care, Mr. Wormwood, and I would pay for everything. She wouldn't cost you a penny. But it's not my idea, it was Matilda's. I will not agree to take her without your full and willing consent." "Come on, Harry," the mother said, pushing the suitcase into the back seat. "Why don't we let her go if that's what she wants? It'll be one less to look after." "I'm in a hurry," the father said. "I've got a plane to catch. If she wants to stay, let her stay. It's fine with me." Matilda leapt into Miss Honey's arms and hugged her, and Miss Honey hugged her back, and then the mother and the father and the brother were inside the car as the car was pulling away with the tyres screaming, so like tyre screeching. The brother gave away through the rear window, but the other two didn't even look back. So it just shows that the parents, they didn't really care, because it says here they didn't even look back, which is a bit of a shame, but there is a good thing for Matilda. Miss Honey was still hugging the tiny child in her arms, and neither of them said a word as they stood watching the big black car tearing round the corner at the end of the road, disappearing forever into the distance. So that is the end of our story. So there's Miss Honey and Matilda. There they are. They're together. So it's lovely for Matilda. She's now going to live with someone who, first of all, cares about her, who loves her, and is kind and caring, which is really nice, what Matilda needs. But it's also nice for Miss Honey, because Miss Honey is going to have a child of her own now, and she'll get to look after Matilda, and they get to live in the house together, and they'll have loads of fun. So that is the end of the story. So it's not quite like Fantastic Mr. Fox. There is a proper end of it, but you could argue that you could make a second Matilda book. You could write all about Matilda's life when she grows up. So what's going to happen with Miss Honey and Matilda when Matilda grows up? What's she going to be? How's she going to is she gonna have a lovely life with Miss Honey, which I would say she will do. And so you could write, Roald Dahl could write a second book on Matilda, all about Matilda and Miss Honey's life together, which if you write a second book is called a sequel. So I really hoped you liked this this book, Matilda, and well done if you're listening to the end. It was 2 very long chapters today. And next week we're going to listen to some of your stories, which I can't wait to listen to you reading and tell the stories. Well, I hope you enjoyed the story, and we'll see you. Have a lovely weekend, and we'll see you on Monday. Bye.